not a dividend.
It's a tale of two clans.
Now, your losses are on someone else's balance sheet.
Generally speaking, airdrops are kind of pointless anyways.
Unnamed trading firms who are very involved.
I like that ETH is the ultimate Ponzi.
DeFi protocols are the antidote to this problem.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Chopping Block. Every couple of weeks, the four of us get together and give the industry insiders' perspectives on the topics of the day. So first, I want you to apologize. We're starting a little bit late because Tarun is very late. He was very late. He wanted to say something to everybody for being late. Tarun, please take the floor.
All I have to say is I do apologize for the late start, but you know, sometimes thinking about time too much can make you go crazy. So.
Oh my gosh. The most Tarun apology ever.
Okay, thanks, Tarun. All right, let's quick intros. So first we got Tom, the DeFi maven and master of memes. Next up we have Tarun, the Gigabrain and Grand Poobah Gauntlet, who is perpetually late. Next we have Laura Shin, the self-proclaimed journalist and the CEO of the show. And then we have myself, I'm Haseeb, head hype man at Dragonfly.
There was no alliteration there.
Last time we had this big drama about whether she was actually a journalist or not, and she claimed that she was.
What do you
and
mean?
we said,
Of course I'm a journalist.
Okay. All right, but moving on. That's what I said. I said that you said that you're a journalist. And so
we can say journalist and author. Hello.
Self-proclaimed journalist and author.
Published self-proclaimed.
Author. Very, very impressive. Anyway, the three of us are early stage investors in crypto, but I want to caveat nothing we say here is investment advice, legal advice, or even life advice. Okay, so we're starting a little bit late, so let's go ahead and jump into the meat of it. The big story of the week has been the sanctions on Tornado Cash. So quick backstory, Tornado Cash, it's a privacy protocol / mixer on Ethereum. At the time, it's been basically the largest privacy solution on Ethereum. It's also the thing that most hacked funds end up getting washed through Tornado or mixed through Tornado. So last week, we saw Treasury and the Office for Foreign Asset Control, also called OFAC, they issued the first ever sanctions against a smart contract. So it was not Tornado Cash, the company. It was not the people who are involved in Tornado Cash, but rather the sanctioned entities include Tornado Cash, quote unquote, which is not a legal entity. It's just the name of a project. And then specifically the list of a certain number of contracts in Tornado Cash, which are mostly on Ethereum. Now, Tornado Cash actually has other contracts on other chains. So Tornado Cash exists on BSC. It exists on Arbitrum. They were apparently not sanctioned, but the Ethereum contracts itself were sanctioned. So this is the first time we've ever seen this. We have seen another mixer get sanctioned. So there's another mixer called Blender, which got sanctioned a while back, but it was a legal entity and the people who were involved with the legal entity. This is the first time we've ever seen this. This is not a person. This is not a company. This is a set of smart contracts and a general project that has been sanctioned by OFAC. And so in response to these sanctions, we saw an enormous amount of responses from the crypto community, huge pushback. Lots of people, one, declaring their solidarity with Tornado Cash. Tornado Cash immediately started getting blocked from a bunch of their vendors. So Alchemy shut off their API access. Same thing with, what was the other one that I think Infura also shut them off. Their governance forum was taken down. The Discord was deleted. And the GitHub was completely erased.
The GitHubs of the founders.
Also. The GitHubs of the founders.
It's anyone who contributed to the Tornado Cash GitHub got their account deleted.
So their accounts were completely erased from GitHub. Even for non-Tornado Cash contributions, they are just wiped off the face of the earth. And we've also seen one of the co-founders, Alexei Pertsev, who is based in, he's a Russian citizen, but he was in Amsterdam at the time. He was arrested in Amsterdam. We still don't know what the charges are. And FOID, which is the enforcement authority in the Netherlands, has not said clearly what the charges are, but he's still currently under arrest. We've had a bunch of commentary from Coin Center, who's preparing to challenge the sanctions, as well as the EFF. It's been really crazy to see this stuff playing out in real time. Nobody really knows what's going on. Soon after that, there was what's called a dusting attack, where some person, I think there's somebody on Twitter proclaimed that they were going to do this. They sent 0.1 ETH from Tornado Cash to a bunch of well-known doxed addresses. So including people like Shaq and Justin Sun, they all received 0.1 ETH. And as a result, a lot of compliance solutions that are supposed to pick up on people who are engaging in interactions with Tornado Cash, which of course is now sanctioned and so very not okay, they were now suddenly getting blocked from a lot of things that use Chainalysis or TRM. So for example, Aave is now blocking people who've interacted with Tornado Cash.
The front end.
The front end. the front end of Aave, as well as the front end of some other protocols, started blocking people who have addresses that have interacted with Tornado Cash. And so we're starting to see this broad ripple effect of what happens when the biggest player, which is, or the biggest tool, which is sanctions, starts to hit and come up against the concepts of decentralization and DeFi. So what are your guys' thoughts on what we've seen with the Tornado Cash sanctions?
Well, you guys should start because you invested in Tornado Cash. So I feel like we should maybe start with their story more closely than probably Laura or I do.
Well, we know the team fairly well, and we do own some Torn tokens. The team broadly, I mean, the surprising thing, and this is public, I mean, at this point, Roman and Alexei have shared this already, is that nobody from OFAC really interacted with the Tornado team at any of this. There was no prior notice from Treasury that, hey, you guys are under investigation. And if you remember, actually, Tornado Cash, so one, they have a compliance tool on the front end that allows you basically like the equivalent of a view key for Monero, where basically you can basically show somebody, look, here's my Tornado Cash address. You can generate a report that basically shows you, look, here's the source of funds, here's where I got it from. But you can selectively disclose this to people you want to disclose it to, rather than disclose it to everybody. And then second, they also, I think it was like in April, they started themselves enforcing on their front end, because obviously the protocol is decentralized, so they have no control over the protocol, which is one of the core points about Tornado Cash.
When they burned access to every function except deposit and withdraw.
Yes.
So like the owners of all functions were like gone. So you really can't change anything.
Exactly. And so this may be an important point that I didn't touch on deeply enough. So the big difference between Tornado Cash and something like Blender, the Blender was run by a company. Like if the company gets deleted, Blender was gone. There was no more Blender. Tornado Cash is an entirely decentralized system of smart contracts that are completely autonomous. No more human intervention is needed for Tornado Cash to run. So Tornado Cash really just is a bunch of code that lives on the blockchain. And when they so for the founders, now they did own the domain and the website, and the domain got seized as well. The website, they were blocking on their website any sanctioned addresses from interacting with Tornado Cash. So ironically, they kind of did what they could for trying to mitigate the degree to which bad actors could use Tornado Cash. But ultimately, once you create decentralized code that anybody can use, well, anyone can use it. Right? The blockchain doesn't have the ability, unless it's voted in by governance, to be able to discriminate which actors can and cannot use the blockchain. And so in some way, the question in my mind that this raises is, does this mean that basically privacy is kind of doomed as a category? Because the reason why Tornado Cash got hit is that was what the biggest and high-profile hacks ended up using. They ended up using Tornado Cash. And so North Korea and the Lazarus Group, when they're hacking the Ronin Bridge and some of these other players, they went through Tornado Cash in order to try to withdraw the funds. And now that Tornado Cash is no longer viable for that, there will be the next thing.
Which was some Lightning service.
Is that right?
Yeah, there was some like random Lightning service that got the proceeds of the Curve Finance hack.
Really?
So the Curve Finance hack took place after the Tornado Cash hack. And I guess the attacker sent it to this there's this Lightning service where you can send ETH to an ETH contract and then relay it to Bitcoin via Lightning. It's much more expensive than using Ren, but Ren theoretically was centralized, because Alameda owned most of the nodes running it. I think they actually announced they're decentralizing today, probably mainly because Alameda is a kind of easy target, let's say, for OFAC, given that a lot of people are US citizens who work there. But I think there's sort of an interesting thing of what the alternatives are showing up. I'm not sure privacy is dead as a category, in the sense that, in fact, it just motivates certain people more. I think there's this weird problem where certainly the funding for privacy projects may initially go down, but there might ironically be kind of like a second wind where people are like, oh, we feel more motivated. Now, the real question is are the developers who are actually good at writing privacy software, which, as we've learned from the ZK world, is really 5 people, and maybe 4 of them are Sibyls. I think there's really not that many people who are extremely, extremely good at and careful at writing some of this type of code, because it's, if you make any mistakes, you have things like the Zcash inflation bug. And so you really have to be, if normal crypto smart contracts are measure 100 times, cut once, writing privacy code is measure 1 million times, cut once. And so I think it's it's hard to find those people who care about it or are good enough actually to implement this stuff. But usually those people are motivated by non-financial incentive, and this is actually kind of an increase in that. So I would actually not be surprised if we see way more things happen from anons who are actually just people who...
Maybe. I think the problem is that like privacy requires a lot of R&D work, right? Like
For
it's
sure.
not, I'm sorry?
Yeah, for sure.
Like it's not something that you can really easily spend together on nights and weekends. You know, like you really need a lot of dedicated energy and time and a strong team. And for a lot of the people who can do it, like they have really high opportunity costs. So I think without consistent funding, I think it is actually really hard. Now that being said, like, you know, if you look at the privacy coins after the Tornado Cash sanctions, they actually didn't go down. Monero and Zcash were basically unperturbed. Even Railgun, which is like a kind of Tornado Nova copy thing, like it dipped a little bit and then it came back. And so I think the market seems to be seeing this as like, okay, this is just Tornado Cash.
Yeah.
But
I actually asked Jerry Brito about this on my show. That was my last question. Like, does he think privacy is going to be the next thing regulators go after in general? He was like, no.
yeah, I think the reality is that look, regulators are not thinking that deeply. They're just like, look, Tornado Cash bad, North Korea bad. So
Right.
Yeah.
let's put the two together. And
I was just struck by like how sloppy everything has been so far. Like I feel like the Treasury really fucked up here. Like specifically listing the Ethereum deployments of it in Tornado Cash, not the other instances. Listing every single pool that was used, not just the 100 ETH pool that North Korea used. Like, you know, is North Korea going to use the 0.1 ETH pool? Probably not, and yet it was banned anyway. The fact that Tornado Cash did have this compliance tool, even though like, well, why do we care about privacy? Like, why is this a problem? Because somebody can get basically fresh ETH and can use it to cash out. Well, if I can go to an exchange and show them the compliance tool and say, hey, here's my original address, here's a new address, you can sort of stop that sort of cash out process. And so everything about it just didn't really make any sense. I don't think they really understood what they were doing. Jerry also brought up the point that how is a smart contract supposed to defend itself? Other sanctioned entities can defend themselves. They can start a lawsuit. What is a smart contract supposed to do? And so the whole thing just feels like they didn't really know what they're doing. And I feel like there's going to be a big legal challenge. And even, we're still find out about what's happening with Alexei, but the fact there have not been charges brought yet. The Dutch police claim that they're launching their own investigation unrelated to the US seems kind of sus. Like the entire thing just feels very kind of amateur hour and really disappointing.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that. Like, I feel like watching this whole thing, what I'm seeing is the same issues that I see with security regulation in the US, where I feel like the crypto community has its views about, what decentralization means, what open source code means, like, and they kind of have these certain distinctions that they're making, right? But that's like the industry. I mean, when Gary Gensler came in as, the SEC chair, people thought like, oh, he gets blockchain. He's going to kind of view things the way we do. And yet he understands the technology and he has a totally different view, right? Like to the point where the SEC seemed to imply that Ether was no longer a security. And then he seems to be
or
kind
no
of
longer a commodity. Or no longer
no
problem.
longer
Now it's a
security.
security.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
okay,
yeah, sorry, before Gary Gensler.
Got it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and then now he's kind of implying that it is a security. So I feel like what I see time and again is like, oh, like even when I read, like for instance, the New York Times or like the Wall Street Journal or whatever, they'll say things like, oh, there was this new crypto legislation introduced and it's very friendly to the industry, meaning like the industry, had a lot of input and they shaped the bill. And like you guys all, because you're part of the industry, you're like, well, that's how it is. Like, these are commodities but like, as we've seen, SEC regulators will look at something that you guys consider decentralized and be like, actually, it's really, identifiable people, it's really centralized. And so I feel like it's the same thing again. I just want to add on about the Dutch authorities. So you're right, we don't know what the charges are and stuff, but I interviewed somebody who used to work at OFAC and FinCEN, and he was saying that essentially we just don't know all the facts about what happened, right? And so it could be that there really are things that are illegal in the Netherlands or whatever jurisdiction this person falls under that, give the authorities a legitimate reason to arrest him. In the US where we have like stuff about free speech and everything, we have a bunch of like US lawyers opining on what this all means, but really it like none of that really applies to this person as far as I understand. So
well, yeah, you're absolutely right about Alexei. We don't know what the charges are. And once we learn the charges, we might be like, oh shit, those are serious charges
right.
that maybe are incidental to his relationship with Tornado Cash, right? And you're absolutely right. Dutch system, I don't know anything about the Dutch system. But I think we are in very good position to be able to criticize OFAC because
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you so much as just pointing out that, like Tom had this very strong opinion. Oh, they definitely fucked up. It may be that they very well understood what the implications would be, but were, confident that they could make the argument that this was the right step. That's all I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, you guys definitely view it all as being one way, but they might have
Yeah.
a completely different interpretation of everything.
This whole thing, in my mind, is also very bizarre because it just parallels so much like the crypto wars of the 90s and the case law that was presented there and the establishment of code as free speech. And so the whole open source privacy movement. And I feel like we're just replaying this again, even though we've sort of already seen this happen, 30 years in the past.
Right. I mean, yeah, maybe.
I mean, these were the same arguments that were made of why encryption should be illegal. It's
Yes.
like,
Yeah, I know.
why are you encrypting stuff?
But-
Don't you have something to hide? Doesn't North Korea encrypt stuff?
At least in the US, as far as I understand, regulations around financial things are like way stricter than around other things. So that's like, I know
I mean,
people. all,
encryption was financial regulation, right? Like, what was the pro argument for encryption? Was it credit cards? That's the thing
Oh.
we need to encrypt sending over the internet, right? And it's like, okay, this bad stuff that people do about sending illegal secrets and whatever, I don't know, whatever nonsense they were obsessed with at that time. That's the collateral damage that we're willing to accept in order to allow for good economic activity to go on unperturbed with encryption.
And
Oh, interesting.
it was also very serious because they were munitions. And so it was an arms control export. And so obviously, smuggling, munitions out of the country is also extremely illegal. And yet, that was sort of changed.
Yeah, and it took people who were, one, obsessed with privacy for anything to change because most normal people don't care or don't even understand what's going on. And second, it took people who were willing to do so at personal risk. Because at that time, the developers behind PGP took personal risk in creating technology that they knew was illegal in the US, right? And actually, Adam Back, for whatever misgivings I might have about him,
Right.
he was a true cypherpunk and a rebel. I think wasn't him who had RSA in his signature.
On his T-shirt or something.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think it was his email signature was the RSA algorithm, which was technically illegal. It was
Right.
it was illegal to as a munition, as something that's supposed to only the military is supposed to have these mathematical formulas, which is a ridiculous concept on its face. And now the idea is that this set of code is illegal. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, look, did they say that? No, they didn't say it. They said some vague thing about Tornado Cash and these Ethereum addresses, which are not even all the addresses of Tornado Cash. Which is my point is that what they're infringing on is a really important, very difficult conversation that we need to grapple with these conversations, not have answers handed from on high. Right?
Yeah. And I'm not saying that I don't agree with you guys. Like, I'm somebody who does consider privacy super important. I find it weird when people don't. But I'm just saying that I feel like, very swiftly, the community kind of had a very certain take on everything. And I was like, well, we don't know their reasoning. They might come out with a lot of reasons why this was the right move. That's all I'm just trying to say.
Yeah.
You may think they definitely bungled it and they be like, no, this is exactly what we intended.
Yeah. Knowing the, average level of competence and intelligence of most of these, government officials, I would be very surprised if they had, a really good argument as to why was this the move? I think it's just you have a hammer and this is where you're going to use instead of, and from their perspective, it's what are they really losing? Right. It's a classic. I think that's, you look at all these protocols and these companies that have sort of abandoned Tornado Cash. And it's are Microsoft lawyers going to stand up for Tornado? No, it's extremely high risk, very low reward. So they're just going to get rid of it. I think the Treasury probably did a very similar calculation.
Yeah, then you saw who's the legislator who was finally we stamped out, Tornado Cash, which is owned by North Korea.
Oh, it was the Secretary of
Blinken.
State.
Oh,
and not
Blinken,
even-
Blinken, who
Yeah.
claimed that Tornado Cash was created by North Korea, which is just this whole thing is just this boogeyman. Even the title of the post is U.S. Treasury sanctions notorious virtual currency mixer Tornado Cash. It's just oh my god, it's just all designed to create this fear. Where it's what is Tornado Cash? It's a privacy protocol that some bad people use. When you sanction this thing, they will find the next thing to use. And are we going to sanction that thing next? Right? The next hack is going to go somewhere. It might be some lightning thing. It might be they wrap through Monero and they go into their Monero bridge and they use Monero, or they use Zcash next, or they use Ren. And there will always be something that bad people use And is the theory that we're going to operate with is that we'll whack them all one at a time until one that's not sympathetic shows up and actually fights us?
Yeah, but I have a question. Like, what if the government comes out and is like, okay, here are the ways that Tornado Cash was actually centralized. And it's like some kind of nuanced argument about, I don't know, I'm going to,
I think the team was extremely careful to avoid components of centralization. I mean, they burned the admin keys. They didn't run like a relayer. It was really just, you build the code. They didn't even deploy it. There was a deployment ceremony. So I'm open to the idea that maybe there's more to it.
So then who deployed
but that's the thing. They didn't sanction the people. If you sanction the people, then it's like, okay, there's some argument about it. So people are responsible.
So
they didn't sanction the people. If they sanction the people, then I agree.
Well, they didn't know.
Maybe they
Clearly, if the Secretary of State thought it was North Korea, they didn't even know the right people were on
No,
they relied
it's very
on GitHub.
hard not to know who the people
They
are.
relied
They're
on
the three
GitHub.
biggest contributors on GitHub.
Yeah, I know. I'm just saying, like, I don't think they did that much. They clearly did not bubble up all their due diligence.
Yeah,
I would say the one thing, though, that's important. Yeah, so with regard to a ceremony, ceremonies are when basically you have a group of people who each contribute part of the randomness to the initial creation of like the initial Genesis block that is used to be the initial point of random number generation for like a privacy protocol. So you can think of it as like no one person contributed the initial Genesis, kind of like in the Satoshi has that famous quote. It's actually many people contributed part of it and it got aggregated.
So they did that, but there was also a deployment ceremony. So they basically used Create 2 and said, hey, you can do this transaction and it's going to deploy a component of Tornado Cash.
Okay,
So they didn't even do
There
that.
was like 30 contracts that were deployed by random people.
Right.
And there was no incentive to do it. People just did it.
Right.
So, yeah. I mean, this whole thing, like, I mean, clearly this is going to be a fight. And the thing that's frustrating about this is that, and this is part of the imbalance of power between the government and individuals, is that, when OFAC takes a step, even if that step is miscalculated, it's a breach of their abilities, right, or what they're constitutionally allowed to do. The amount of work it takes to undo that step, right, the amount of legal expenses, the amount of time, the amount of energy, the amount of economic destruction that happens, it's hugely asymmetric, right? It's going to take years before anything happens on any of this, right? Obviously, we'll eventually learn the charges. We'll get more details about what happened and why, and but the amount of work that it takes to push the government back one step is enormous relative to what it took for them to take the step. And that's part of the frustration of something like this. And that's part of why regulation by enforcement sucks. Like, that's why it's so much better to regulate through conversations so that people can actually make decisions as a collective about what is the right way to treat privacy. How do we think about financial privacy? Is the idea that, look, you don't have the right to financial privacy if bad actors are also sharing in that financial privacy with you? Is that the idea? Is like, what's the theory here?
I mean, the problem, and maybe this is to Laura's point, is like, most of the time, I think if the government sees a sanctioned country that, we've had sort of mal relationships with for decades, anywhere near anything, it just becomes a like stop everything type of decision. Now, there's collateral damage in that, of course, but that is the cost they're willing to pay for enforcing kind of this type of thing. And like, I agree that there's a nuanced argument against it, but I do not think the government has been kind of told to have a care about a nuanced argument. Their regulators effectively lay down the law of like anything North Korea has to be kind of bludgeoned. And that's it.
I understand. But this is clearly like a very different categorical difference, right? With like what they usually do. They usually sanction a foreign person or a foreign company, which makes sense, right? Like, okay.
All they're doing is taking that framework and just hoping that it works.
Well, it's like, imagine that they sanctioned like literally a code base. They didn't literally sanction the code base because they just said Tornado Cash, which people assumed meant the code base, and so GitHub deleted their code base. Imagine that they sanctioned this code North Korea uses for their hacking efforts, right? And it's like some, I don't know, some disassembler or something like that. They say North Korea uses this, and if we take this offline, North Korea is going to be screwed. Right?
I mean, we do that, by the way, with hardware export restrictions and IP. So I would argue that you're not totally code is free speech, but hardware gates are not free speech, which is like a funny distinction.
Okay.
Export restrictions on hardware is actually quite different, even though it's the same code. It can be the same code burned into an FPGA, and it will be illegal as hardware, but not as code.
I think that is a reasonable distinction to make, though. But maybe I don't have a good argument why. But I see your point.
I'm just saying, like, they draw the line arbitrarily already to me. So it's just like it's turtles all the way down once you cut
It
the
is
line.
turtle. Yeah.
Well, I think now people are talking like, what is sort of the next shoe to drop, right? Like, are validators supposed to process transactions from sanctioned entities? Is Ethereum supposed to exist and process transactions from sanctioned entities? Like, it is, turtles all the way down when you sort of look at the stack and wonder, like, where does it sort of stop?
Yeah, it gets interesting when you look at the questions of after the switch to proof of stake, then like, is Coinbase gonna, process a block that has interactions with Tornado Cash in it? Or, I mean, it just gets really, really weird quickly. I don't know. So this may be a segue to our next topic, but I just feel like I keep on learning so many different things about, what things will be like post-merge that really call into question certain fundamental elements of Ethereum and make me wonder like, oh, is this really going to be a good thing, or is this going to end up in creating a lot of, potential threats to Ethereum? I don't know. There's just
What are you thinking of?
so this obviously is like the most recent one, just those questions around validators and stuff. But this centralization vector around like liquidity, staking derivatives, and Lido and stuff. Like I did a big show on this, and I kind of was surprised that like there wasn't a little bit more alarm about it, because just as a journalist listening, I'm like, whoa, this seems potentially quite bad. And then now, I'm learning a little bit more about MEV. I don't know a ton about it yet, enough to really give an opinion. But I can definitely say that given the range of things that I've heard, there's like really good points being made against institutionalizing MEV and like just making it something that is an accepted part of Ethereum. And so I don't know, there's just like a number of ways where I'm like, whoa, shit might go down.
So maybe I will talk about
Yes, I
this.
had a feeling Tarun would have an opinion.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is Ethereum already accepts MEV. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They've in fact centralized it off chain, and there's in spite of the fact that that's been tried to be decentralized by multiple attacking auctions, we've centralized to like 70 to 80% of hash power in one. So the first thing is it's already there. The question is whether it gets shared, the revenue gets shared amongst all validators or not.
But some other people would say that another question would be, should we do more to minimize it rather than just accept it?
So there's
even
a
before
couple
that.
things. I think the first thing is that every mitigation mechanism has a cost. So anything that's doing something like, say, fair ordering, either is more centralized, so like the Chainlink Arbitrum version of the world has a centralized sequencer effectively, or like at least a centralized off-chain relay. Or it adds a huge amount of latency or kind of like changes to the UX that would be unacceptable to most users or developers. Like you just have to wait a long time. You have no clue what other transactions are being included, like a batch auction. The second thing is there's sort of what I would call my Folk-Shannon theorem, which is like anytime you actually have any uncertainty in a transaction processing mechanism, there's always some amount of minimum extractable value from people who are processing the transaction. And when you force people to go from the environment of like, hey, I submit a transaction to someone who then afterwards is like very low latency with like all the other parties I have to interact with, then it's like, okay, well, there's that. The fact that it's very low latency means the net extractable amount is a lot lower. But now that we're like, hey, we want to actually just send packets, or I want to send transactions over the internet, which has tons of reliability issues. You can't guarantee that the latency is low. You're obviously going to, the higher the uncertainty, the higher the extractable value. So there's no real way around that. That's just like the laws of physics. I guess the second thing is that there are ways of mitigating. And most of the ways of mitigating actually involve in making the auction better or making the economic process better, not like these fair ordering things that change the security assumptions, use new cryptography, like that maybe is not ready for prime time yet.
There's trusted hardware,
which gets broken in every other month. Like I'm just waiting for like all these SGX things to break at some point.
Well, and protocols are also redesigning themselves over time to like reduce MEV opportunities. Right. So yeah,
I think there's going to end up being like we're just converging to whatever the information theoretic
Yeah.
minimum
But
you
let
can
me
extract
maybe
is.
paint the intuition that you're trying to convey here, because I think it might not be intuitive to most people. Why MEV is intrinsic to blockchains. So MEV is basically the idea is like, imagine you're running an exchange, okay, but you're the exchange operator. And as the exchange operator, you can ultimately decide what happens when, as long as nobody is obviously cheated. And when you're a totally centralized exchange, obviously nobody can really tell who's getting cheated. And so people are just sending you stuff and you're like, oh, you know what? This one goes here and this one's going to go here. And then boom, I'm going to go in between and I'm going to make some money. Now, the tighter that the bounds are, like let's say that everybody is, coordinating, everybody can actually see who's doing what trades when. Now it's harder for you to cheat. But as long as it's not instant, the moment two people send you a trade, right? If two people send you a trade and you can decide which one goes first and you can decide when your trade goes in, there's always some MEV. MEV is just the ability to control how the order book plays out. And Tarun's point is that it's impossible to get rid of. You can make it better, you can make it faster, you can do whatever. But as long as somebody runs the exchange, they can always do something to make even a little bit of profit. Right now in Ethereum, you can make a ton of profit because there's 7-second blocks or 12-second blocks basically, which means that there's a lot of time for you to go in and reorder stuff and do a lot of nonsense.
I also think people give Flashbots for saying, oh, Flashbots is like causing MEV or something like that. I think the mental model for Flashbots is sort of, you ever seen like the Hamsterdam episode of The Wire, where it's like they sort of sanction a portion of the city to like basically sell drugs. And I feel like Flashbots is sort of like that in my mind. Like this is going to happen anyway. So we may as well have an orderly market for it as opposed to, what people previously did, which was like, bribe buyers, do co-location, like crazy gas spikes, stuff like that.
Yeah, and so actually, the history of this was that these probabilistic gas auctions led to people spam, instead of saying like, I want to be after this transaction because I'm front running or back running. You instead would just spam the validator with 1 million copies of the same transaction with the gas just a little bit below the transaction you want to be after. And if there's many competitors, everyone was spamming and you had this like huge spam war against the network. And it just like basically was non-productive usage because most of the block would be filled with these failed transactions that were people trying to spam. By moving that separate from the production of a block via the Flashbots auction, you actually at least made it much more orderly for the average user, the non-strategic user, the dumb user, the user who just like opens MetaMask, hits send, not the user who's like sitting and actually like monitoring the mempool and interacting with these things directly. So the proposal in Ethereum that is the controversial one that you're talking about is this notion of what's called proposer-builder separation. So the idea is that builders, who are block builders, people who are taking sequences of transactions that they see, ordering them, executing them, and giving a proof that like they executed those transactions correctly, they then bid. They say, here's how much I'm willing to pay for this block, or here's how much I want to get paid for this block. And a proposer basically takes those bids and aggregates them and then submits to a network. Now, one of the reasons this is supposed to be better, at least in some sort of more economic sense, is that if there actually is a competitive market for block builders, people who are like trying to like rearrange sequences and like find the optimal block to build, then censorship becomes very expensive because you have to pay significantly more than the maximum price that a block builder is willing to offer for many blocks to effectively do the censorship attack. And so the idea of like doing this splitting actually does sort of help, but it doesn't mitigate the fact that you still have these like supply chain attacks on the actual code base, right? Where someone puts in like the meme was like OFAC get, like the Ethereum client has like an OFAC check. So I guess the main thing is these things are just still a little half baked to put in the protocol fully, and they're not going to go in immediately. But at the end of the day, there's no way of the best you can do is just add in mitigating mechanisms and then actually share the revenue. The one problem in proof of work is that you actually cannot share the rev. So imagine there's revenue that's earned from MEV. You can't actually distribute it to all miners. So like let's say on each block, when you enter a proof of work MEV auction, whoever mined that block gets all the MEV rewards. There's no way of splitting it. And the reason for that is with hash power, you actually don't know, and this is a feature and a bug, depending on how you view it. You don't actually know the distribution of all miners. You don't know how much resource each miner is getting. You only approximately know it, and you're measuring that based on the difficulty adjustment of the blockchain. And in proof of stake, you could actually take a portion of the MEV and redistribute it to all validators as sort of a bonus for staying honest. And in some ways, that's sort of the direction that's being moved in to kind of eliminate the centralization effect of sort of a Flashbots auction. So I would say that the OFAC get thing got confounded with this thing that wants to be added, and then there's lots of FUD, and people didn't bother reading like carefully any of the documentation, and so hence we got the storm on the internet.
Yeah, the weird thing. So all this MEV stuff, Flashbots started early last year, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they were informal for longer. But
Yeah. Like before that, the really interesting thing is that before that there was, so initially when Flashbots was first conceived, I was very strongly against Flashbots. We are actually investors in Flashbots now, but I was very strongly against Flashbots.
all three of us.
All three of us are investors, yeah. And basically my view was that I thought they were playing with fire, and that the idea, like institutionalizing the idea of MEV extraction, is going to make basically Wall Street and traditional enterprises be like, what the hell is going on in there? Like, you guys are just agreeing to all front run each other and steal from each other, and that like anybody who's not smart enough or connected enough is just going to get destroyed. And I thought one of two things. So one, there was this trend actually of a lot of projects that were what we call accelerationist, basically meaning they're like, this thing will eventually happen. Let's make it happen right now, and then try to create the perfect version of the eventual state. Before that point, obviously there were MEV auctions and there was MEV, but it was kind of a gentleman's agreement not to extract it, right? And so I remember back in 2017.
That wasn't true on chain though. There are people definitely.
I mean, on chain, but in terms of the miners themselves, like I remember in 2017 there was this famous instance, one of the first instances of MEV that was very widely known of, which was that F2 Pool during the status ICO. Very old school ICO back in the ICO era. In the status ICO, it was discovered that F2 Pool had put in one of their own transactions to basically mint buy a bunch of tokens in the ICO before anybody else could. And there was a huge storm about this. A bunch of people pulled their hash rate from F2 Pool. You were like, oh my God, how could you do this? You're destroying the integrity of Ethereum. And after that, the miners learned you don't mess with blocks. It's just part of the Ethereum like immune system.
There was this paper out, I think, this week. I think it was like some, basically actually talking about F2 Pool.
It was selfish mining.
Manipulating.
Selfish mining like thing. Yeah, it's not exactly.
Single block selfish mining.
Yeah. So F2 Pool has gotten with a hand in cookie jar a few times.
But they've always been the kind of
they're the bad boy. They're the bad boy.
Yeah, they always are. They were the first ones to move from Flashbots to whatever that competitor was. They come back. So like, I feel like they're always they're always living on the bleeding edge.
They are, but I think it's interesting because like that single event, every single mining pool that I'd ever met at Ethereum, they remembered that. They all knew about that event because they knew that, look, there's certain things you don't mess with. And one of the things you don't mess with is you don't reorder within a block. And it was always understood that, okay, a mining pool is allowed to have their own transactions at the end of a block that are non-fee paying. They're just like, do payouts and stuff and just kind of administrative stuff. But you don't mess with the internals of a block. And it was really Flashbots that started to move the Overton window of what is acceptable within Ethereum, which is that, no, MEV is a thing. These MEV auctions are happening on chain through PGAs. We should institutionalize them and remove the noise from the mempool and put it in a separate section for pros over here and everyone else.
Arguably, though, I would say that I think that we would not be at the point where Ethereum actually was able to support so many different types of applications with increasingly less sophisticated users without Flashbots. And it's not like it's inaccessible. In theory, like anyone could just change their RPC and use it. So I would just say that, the main thing I always take I'm always surprised at is there's just always people like, oh, it's like so extractive and like nothing, like I don't really understand how you expect this thing to be an economic system and not have some type of like non-strategy proofness. First of all, there's no incentive compatibility in any of this stuff as designed. Like only at the consensus layer does anyone even care about measuring whether incentives are sort of compatible. Once you get to application layer, literally no one actually even bothers checking if their mechanism works. They just try to deploy and mint the token and get out. That's like, and if people are like that, then obviously they're going to create all these like horribly inefficient things. I remember when Artblocks came out, which is like this big NFT launchpad thing. They had this like horribly implemented Dutch auction where it would always start at a valuation that's lower than what all the bidders wanted. And so they basically they took this auction that was supposed to actually be like an orderly thing, and then they turned it into like the worst type of first price auction because everyone is like, oh, this is 50% cheaper than what I really think the value is. So I'm going to spam for this. And stuff like that, the average person who participated in an Art Blocks auction would have gotten 0 if not for Flashbots. So you have to give them a lot of credit for.
Look, to be clear,
that.
I totally give Flashbots credit. I mean, at this point, it's clear that we're not going back.
Look at Solana. I mean, a lot of the problems on Solana happened because they didn't
100%.
have an orderly mechanism and the
They
fees were
didn't even
0.
have fees, right? They
Right.
have a fee market.
Wait, before this turns into yet another Solana bashing show, I want to ask because so again, I am still doing my research on MEV, but as far as I understand, like people are pointing out that there are certain regulations against this type of thing, and so some people are saying like, oh, this literally is kind of like illegal. So I was wondering.
I think it's plausible that we move to proof of stake that some exchanges don't extract MEV.
100%. Like, yeah, it's optional now, right? Like if you're running an Ethereum client, you can use MEV Boost, which is a software which basically lets you take these blocks. And I suspect these big, like Coinbase, right? They're not going to run MEV Boost. It's too sketchy.
So yeah, I find that weird that like one group is going to be like, okay, we'll do the thing that's illegal, and then another group is like, okay, we have to abide by the law, right?
But that's
Do you
always
understand?
been true in this industry.
Yeah, when has that not been true?
When has that not been true? Like, come on. We were just talking about tornado. That's the perfect example of this.
Well, wait, but tornado. So obviously now it's sanctioned, but I mean, unless you're a North Korean hacker, like a lot of people were just using it
I mean,
like,
he's
for
being
privacy.
facetious.
Yeah,
okay.
Tornado is obviously not. Sanctions are not backwards looking. Sanctions are forward.
Okay,
looking.
but so you agree that MEV Boost then would be illegal? Like,
Not
no,
really,
it's
not
not
really, not
clearly
really,
that
not
it would
really.
be illegal. It's that, I mean, if anything were to happen, it would probably be civil, and it's like you're opening yourself up to lawsuits, and like you're opening up to your like it's just like
So the real
if you're
question
Coinbase,
is,
why would you want to bother?
yeah, the real question is, does Uniswap get regulated as like a swaps dealer or like a broker dealer, or at least if you care about U.S. regulation? If that ever was true and like kind of like the sanctions forward-looking, any future Uniswap transaction gets qualified, then I agree it's true. But right now, it's like
Yeah, that doesn't seem
the
plausible.
government doesn't even seem to be able to distinguish the difference between like an LP share and a ERC-20 for taxes. Forget about for like understanding how to redeem an LP share. Like,
Yeah, no, I think the reality is that a lot of Ethereum exists in a global environment, right? Most people who use Ethereum don't live in America. They're not Americans. Most
Right.
human beings. are
the
not
weird
Americans.
part, though, is most developers do.
A very large portion of
A large
America-
proportion.
A large portion of developers are unfortunately subject to American laws, but Ethereum itself is not. And you have to build Ethereum in such a way that it works no matter where you are. And the MEV is something that just comes out of the incentives, comes out of the game theory, right? And it kind of doesn't matter if you make MEV illegal in one country, someone in a different country will extract MEV.
I'll give you another example. Arguably, if the US government ever said that an online ad impression, which is sort of like when you go buy a Facebook ad, you're buying like future right to a certain set of demographics that get a certain ad, right? It's basically a security. You could argue that it actually is a fucking common enterprise. Like, and it is a security. Like, if the government really wanted to go after Facebook, like back when they cared more, they would probably have just been like, ad impressions are securities. And, you're a broker dealer, so like you can't front run everyone. But instead it's not, right? And like, if you look at Google and Facebook, they do their entire business model is do MEV for yourself. You run the auction, you sequence when particular bidders are bidding. And 90% of bidders use automated bidding strategies that you made as the company. Their business model is literally only MEV. At least here it's like competitive.
I like this
All right,
idea of extending MEV to other
But that is
companies.
what it
Yeah,
is.
that's
Like
funny.
let's call a donkey an ass when it is an ass. It is in this case.
All right. You heard it here first. Facebook, the biggest MEV extractor of all time.
Wow.
I mean, it's the same concept. Like,
I understand the point. I just I always enjoy.
Just really the fact that it's like a second price auction, though. I mean, you do get more.
it's not second price anymore.
Yeah,
They literally got rid of all
Google
this.
didn't.
Google
Google
sort of
still-
didn't. Sort of didn't. Like, yeah, some auctions are, some aren't.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Anyway, all right. Let's move away from Google and Facebook auctions. So Actually, one of the things that I want to chat about that we brought up before the show started, when Tarun was still not here,
Oh, right.
is
See, aren't you
we were
happy as
talking a
late?
lot. Well,
No,
You got more
because
bonding.
we
very
had a
un-
great
you got-
discussion, and the listeners would have benefited. But anyway,
it is really
Yeah,
all your fault.
let's
It's
launch
really all
into
your
it.
fault, Tarun.
Silver line.
So there's been a lot of hubbub this week in the NFT community about these exchanges that are no longer enforcing royalties. So royalties, for those who are not aware, generally when you effect a sale of an NFT on a platform like OpenSea, there's a certain percentage of each sale that goes back to the original creator. And the creator specifies what they want the royalty to be for that collection. So it turns out, and a lot of people did not know this, and I actually didn't know this until I learned it very recently, is that these royalties are not enforced at the smart contract layer. The way a lot of people talk about NFTs is like, oh, NFTs are this way that creators can get paid and blah, blah, blah. But actually these royalties are kind of like a suggestion. So it's kind of like, you just sort of tape something on like your little, bucket that you're busking with. And it's just like, please, suggested donation is 5%. But it's up to the actual exchange to actually enforce that. And it turns out there are a couple of exchanges. One of them is Element and the other one is SudoSwap that are not enforcing royalties. And as a result, they're actually growing quite a bit in trading volume because they're cheaper than the places that enforce royalties.
Since Tom is the real NFT degen here, I would like love a little TLDR of what SudoSwap actually does, because I actually have not really understood.
I mean, I feel like that's. Oh, we can talk about it.
Like,
I'm
you
talking about
mentioned it,
royalties.
I feel like the reason that they've become popular is also
Yeah.
their new mechanism, unlike OpenSea.
I think a lot of it is just the lack of royalties.
Oh, really?
Well,
Okay.
no, I think that's
So
a portion
why I
of
don't
it.
Yeah,
but it's
a portion of it,
also
it's a portion of it.
you can think of it as, I know you're a big NFTX fan. You can think of it as basically a sort of Uni v3 version of NFTX, where basically any individual can set their own sort of curve for the NFTs that they have, and then they use a routing contract that aggregates over all the curves, so you get better execution, better
per
pricing.
collection or like
Per collection.
Okay.
And lower fees. You're not doing the whole fractionalized 2C swap thing. So it's just like a better, cheaper place to trade NFTs. And the NFT meta is trending towards floor trading, and so it sort of all kind of lines up.
Oh, so you don't even care which one you get. So you don't care
Well,
like when
you can actually specify.
you can-
It's sort of like NFTX in that way.
Okay.
But it's like, hey, if you're trying to move, a lot of money through an NFT collection, maybe you're less, picky about that, and it's more optimized for that sort of meta within NFTs. But yes, no royalties. Yeah, I mean, it's this very weird dynamic where I feel like we wouldn't even be having this conversation had OpenSea not opted in to have royalties in the first place. But they did, which sort of set the standard, which created this impression among everybody, including very sophisticated people, that royalties are somehow enforced on a smart contract level as opposed to just being this suggestion that exchanges choose to enforce. And I think as a result, it's like, well, are exchanges incentivized to use royalties? Well, it's like, no, because it increases the price for, the assets and sort of reduces trading. Do users want royalties? Some do that I think want to, respect creators and give them attribution, but most don't. They just want a cheaper NFT. And so it's like, why are we even in this meta in the first place of people paying?
Remember there was a supply side problem in 2019 and 2020 where forget about the demand side. There was just like no one you could convince who is like a relatively prominent artist to even make one of these things. And so the royalties were actually like a way of like bootstrapping the supply side before kind of, the demand side came after DeFi Summer. So like, I do think the supply side piece of it
That's
was
an interesting argument. Is that the royalties were there to bring people in at the beginning, but now the demand
who were more
The
prominent,
creators.
famous,
Yeah.
the creators.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but this is exactly my argument of like why creators were interested in NFTs. Mark Cuban on my show was like, oh, I got interested when I realized I could sell tickets to Dallas Mavs games and, enforce a royalty in all the resales. So, creators are very interested in this. And, as a creator myself, I have to say that I personally would totally want to give, some of my resale value over to other creators. Yeah, I don't want to go into the economics necessarily of being a
I would
writer.
love to
but,
go into the economics of it.
Oh, okay. So if like for you, for a unit of work, you make like this amount of money. For
Mhm.
me, for a unit of work, I make like this amount of money, especially with writing in particular.
Sure.
So it's like super offensive. Like you don't even know how many people have like tweeted things at me like, why don't you give things away for free? And I'm like, oh, because it took me like X amount of time to make that. And like, that's what I do for a living. I mean, like, yes, people like you, like VCs, you can write for free because you make your money doing something else. But this is actually what I do to make money, right? And this goes to my point. We were discussing this while Tarun was late. I was kind of annoyed when I opened my Twitter application and I see Spencer Noon. No offense to Spencer, I've never met him in person, but he's a variant fund, and he tweeted something like, "Oh, when artists' songs are streamed, they shouldn't make any money because the song is effectively an advertisement for their work." And I was like, do you know any musicians? Because like musicians, they are much more likely to say like, I should earn so much more for my streams. They're more likely to complain about the fact that like they kind of have to tour to make enough money. It's like the actual work they do doesn't make enough, so they have to do this additional thing on top to actually make the money. And so he, I just was like, and I was surprised because, Jesse Walden is part of Variant Fund, and I was a little bit like, I feel like Jesse definitely knows musicians, so you guys should have talked to some to like understand what their world is like from a business perspective. And then I was surprised, like Kyle Samani backed Spencer Noon up, and I was like, I just tweeted back at them. I was like, you guys must not know any musicians.
I think Jesse's married to a musician.
Yeah. So that's why it surprises me. Spencer did not seem to understand the economics of being a musician. And, it's like they want musicians to be like entrepreneurs and like, have this like, oh, I'm going to like spend, because Kyle's point was, oh, there's a ton of businesses where you give away the core business for free and then you charge for stuff on top. And I'm like, right, but a musician wants to make music and be paid for it, not like have this whole business model that's super complicated where like they do the work, but they do that for free and then they do this other thing to make the money. And it's like not what they want to do. They want to make money.
Was amazing.
They want to make money and they want to be paid. They want to make music and be paid for it. Yeah, I was a little bit like, and I don't normally get kind of emotional when I'm looking at Twitter. I'm like fascinated by the crypto discussion, but I don't normally like have a sense of personal involvement. But I have musician friends, so like I just was like, you do not understand this world at all. But anyway.
Okay, so let me give the supervillain argument for why I think actually I'm fine with the idea of destroying royalties. So here's the, because you asked about the economic argument. You asked about the economic argument. So I'm gonna give you the economic argument. Okay. So if when let's ignore music and all this NFT stuff, right? The classic thing is selling tickets. When you're selling tickets to like some basketball game, right? Very often what will happen is scalpers will come in and they'll buy the tickets so they can go and resell them later to people who actually want to sit down and watch the show. So if a scalper bought the tickets from you, right, and there was a tax that was automatically enforced when they resold the tickets to somebody else, the scalper would pay you less, right? Because they have to. Because, so let's say I have to pay 25% of what I make from you. Like you automatically enforce it. Let's not say how. Let's just say you have a software system that does all this, right? When I reassign the ticket to somebody else, I have to pay 25% of whatever I charge them back to you. Then I'm going to be willing to pay you less the first time that I scalp the tickets because I know I'm going to get less at the end because I have to pay 25% to hand it off to somebody, right? That the tax that you pay when you resell the asset, it flows through to the original value that the scalper is willing to pay. If the scalper knows they're going to make less money because they have to resell it, then they're not going to be willing to pay as much.
You are making some assumption about the velocity of resale here, which I think the point is like musicians are not like, they're not like constantly trying to churn their revenue. They're not like, they are, this is the reason music NFTs will never happen.
Here's the basic shape of the argument I'm making, right? Is that like, if you remove royalties, then people will be willing to pay more for the initial mint because the initial mint is going to be worth more, right? Like I can now sell this thing for higher than I could originally sell it for.
But you're assuming,
so I'll be willing to pay
resale
more.
Is happening fast enough that people care. Like there's some trade-off between like royalty and resale frequency, right? And like that's sort of like, I don't think for musicians it's like that. For even for artists, fine artists, it's not that.
Why would it matter what
for
the
this like
is?
these like collectibles? It's clearly like people want to just constantly like Beanie Baby trade, Pokemon card trade. I don't.
I see. If you're structuring it purely as like a donation and you're not actually
or
use or resell.
Or if it's like,
but then in that case, the
if it's like
matter.
fine art where it's like a tax harbor for someone else, then like, the royalty is the only way that the artist ever gets paid.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the part that seems ridiculous to me, which is the velocity of trading of NFTs, which is like, should Bored Apes be making $50 million a year from people trading Bored Apes? Like, that seems pretty high. Maybe it should be a per transaction fee, or it should be, kind of, something nominal versus like, the 10% that you see.
But when you buy merch at I don't know if at like a music festival or a concert or something, you're not going and trying to resell the merch immediately. that's the problem with all these music NFTs. They're assuming that people like want to resell the rights to things. It's like, why would I even own intellectual property or fake intellectual property and like immediately sell it? It only makes sense for these like weird collectible things. I just don't think it like for people who are making these things where they're like not trying to be businesses and they're just like, hey, we're in our own creator. I just don't think they care about the velocity.
Well, I just don't think it makes a difference, right? Like, I think at the end of the day, if you get 2.5% of every future sale of this asset, right, then
It could be time locked.
in economic expectation, if you don't have those royalties, you'll make that 2.5% more upfront. And you could decide that you want to spread out that 2.5% over time by taking 2.5% of whatever
you're
you sell.
assuming a
and
user
invest it in
want
an
no.
annuity or something.
This is the difference between like something that's like strategy proof and sort of obviously strategy proof. Strategy proof means like I can bid my true valuation and I actually get but the problem with strategy proofness is these are like, you know, Nobel Prize winner Paul Milgram's terminology for this.
Sure.
Strategy proof has this problem where I still have to reason about if there's many rounds of this, which is the frequency argument. But I have to reason about the future rounds, people's valuations when coming up with my valuation.
Yeah.
Obviously, strategy proof is I don't care. I just do it once and it works. And the problem is the NFT market has stratified itself into games that are like me really spending time thinking about the set of future value. That's different than like what, say, like a fine art person creator cares about.
Sure.
Right. And so like I view the people who make Bored Apes as like the same as someone who like works at Supreme. They don't really give a shit about the quality of the product they're making. It's not the quality of the product. It's literally just like, can I convince enough of this core group of speculators that there's a high enough velocity of churn that it's worth investing in now? Versus something where it's like, I spent like my lifetime making this magnum opus and I just want to sell it once. Right. And like understanding that those are two extremely different notions of how people on both sides have valuations for these things sort of means that like you can't expect. This is why the music NFT thing is a scam. Like it's like never gonna work. Like,
Well, in the case of someone with a magnum opus, like the royalty doesn't matter because no one's going to resell it.
no, but they resell once you're dead.
Wait,
Your
once you're
estate gets
dead,
it.
right? Well, but wait, actually, going to what you were saying about the Dallas Mavs tickets, I have a similar argument to what Tarun was saying, where when they're selling the initial ticket for something like a concert or like a game or whatever, they set what the price is, right? And then the scalper finds what the actual like real
Value
price
is.
is.
Yeah.
So like this is why, this is why creators like NFTs, because they can have that direct relationship with people and they can capture that value rather than a lot of it going to the scalper. So just in your initial example, it like there's this kind of middle person that hopefully wouldn't exist at least as much in NFTs, right? So
Well, the middle person's OpenSea right now.
Well,
arguably.
but I don't think NFT or OpenSea is like buying, the collection that you're
No,
going to drop
it's
and
the
then resell.
speculators, right?
Exactly.
The speculators are the
Yeah.
middle person.
Right.
Unless they pull a Zillow.
Right. So then when you make this whole argument
interesting.
about like, oh, the initial person will want to pay, like, no, it doesn't, because in this new world that we're talking about, we don't have these scalpers or ideally we wouldn't. You see
we
what I'm
do.
saying?
We have the speculators, right? I mean, that's where you're making all the money from is the speculators. That's what the royalty. Who's going to pay the royalties? It's speculators who keep trading the NFTs with each other because they're all speculating.
No, but I think a lot of people that buy in the initial, I mean, it's going to be a mix. It's going to be a mix of speculators and actual real fans that just want
Right.
that thing.
I mean, but the initial mints are like overwhelmingly. I mean, that's what like we're talking about Solana going down because it's not normal people who are like running bots trying to get into the initial mint.
Yeah, but that's why I compare most NFTs that are successful with like shitty shoe drops, which are equally botted,
Yeah,
or like
100%.
shitty watch drops. It's like the same group of like hype beast, like 20 to 30-year-old people who love like
you love
just
talking about
gambling on.
Hypebeast.
Because those are this is the sort of more introverted version of the people waiting in line to buy
Drew,
sneakers.
can you define Hypebeast for us?
Basically anyone who like somehow finds a fad for particular materialistic items, they pick a subset of goods that exist that are definitely bought and sold at a high enough velocity that they don't have to hold inventory for more than one day, and they try to buy the thing right when it drops and then immediately resell it.
That's a Hypebeast.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I kind of feel like they are the ultimate speculators.
Sure.
And in some ways, okay, yeah, sure, those people like Bored Apes. I don't think they have any taste for fine art or like for music IP or like any of these things that are like assets that like the rest of the 99% of the world gives a shit about.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's clear once there's an equilibrium, it's kind of like flashbots, right? It's actually very analogous to flashbots. We're like, before anyone's extracting MEV, we can all kind of gentleman's agreement. Okay, we're going to enforce royalties. Royalties are good. There's a great story about it. And then suddenly somebody crosses the Rubicon. And it's okay. Now one person is over the line, but like that person's bad, and we don't. Talk about that
I'm
person.
excited for this, not because of like the like crypto Twitter version of this world. It's like, oh, kill OpenSea, whatever. I don't think that's
No,
like
OpenSea will absolutely capitulate.
no.
If they start losing market share because other people,
I just think you just stratify the market into the like bag. Like we want it's purely speculative NFTs
But
versus the
that's where all
ones
the
that
money
have like
is.
long term.
But that's where all the money is.
No,
Right
but
now.
creators will want to be on OpenSea.
Yeah,
then.
I agree. I agree. I don't think
Yes.
like everyone wants to be like catering to the bag Supreme kid. Like that's just not. Sorry,
Really?
obviously,
You don't think that's what OpenSea wants to do?
I think they grew off that, but I do think that like now they kind of like they're catering to a different demographic. Look at their website. Look at SuperSwap's website. Come on.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that
Look at Magic Eden's website. Even compare the two of them. Clearly, one is going after like the ultimate speculative bubble people,
sure.
and the other is like trying to be like we have fine art on our.
I
front
think
page.
that I think what you're pointing out. I understand what the argument you're making, but I don't think that looking at the front page of the website, like the Hypebeast you're talking about, don't look at the front page. It's the random person off the street who looks at the front page, and the random person off the street is very different than the average user.
But there are wannabe hype beasts, and Magic Eden is clearly more attractive to them,
sure.
right? Just like even aesthetically, like I'm like, how does one become a hype beast? You just like watch too many skate
So
videos.
you got to start your own course of like how to become a Hypebeast.
You watch too many skate videos, and you're like, okay, like yeah, I really want to like buy all these skate shoes and resell them because like that skateboard's really expensive, and like I think I can make money because like these people are idiots, and like that's like the beginning of the cycle of doom. And so those people need, when they go to your website, need to be like, oh, like wait, you're like trying to get sold at Sotheby's? Nah, this shit sucks. Like those people are not going to like look at that site and say that. Whereas like Magic Eden's clearly catering to that. And I think like we're seeing the stratification of the NFT market with high quality assets versus low quality assets. Low quality has high frequency churn. High quality is like maybe it's more like fine art,
like art blocks type.
yeah, exactly. And like
Yeah.
unfortunately they maybe got rugged by Mr. Zoo, but I think and the fact that Three Arrows owns such a large portion of the art block collection.
Oh yikes!
Or owns, I don't know who owns those keys technically right now.
Starry Night,
Someone
Unchained,
owns those keys.
Yeah.
But I think that we're going to see the market stratify, and like the bear market is the perfect time for that because like there's just all the speculative stuff has to concentrate in the highest velocity exchange. And it will probably be bad for OpenSea short term. But I do think long term, their brand recognition probably means they can go high up market.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, I think like up market is Bored Apes. That's up market.
Yeah, you said talking about Sotheby's. I'm like, guess what's getting sold at Sotheby's? It's CryptoPunks.
I know. Look. I'm not disagreeing with that. But my point is these people, most of the volume you see right now is like not even, if you ignore Bored Ape and crypto volume and CryptoPunk volume, it's like all these like random Solana NFTs, which is why you can see Magic Eden beating OpenSea some days. And so I think the reason that's true is because it's like, oh, like the newcomer who like is like, I saw all these people get rich last year. Where can I go? But I only have $10. Oh, it's Solana NFTs.
Yeah. What's the rake on OpenSea?
2.5%.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, actually, going back to a much earlier point that Tom made, where he was like, oh, maybe it should be a fee or whatever. Like, to my mind, again, a creator's perspective, I'm like, oh, well, if I create something and it becomes so huge, then like, yeah, percentage makes sense because then I should benefit in this thing that's gotten so huge. So the idea that like no matter what the value is, you would always get the same amount, like that to me just doesn't make sense. Like, it does make sense to me that it would be percentage based.
Maybe it's also just a byproduct of the fact that, well, I think if you did it per transaction, way more enforceable versus, trying to do it per exchange, which is like, can't do that right now. But I think it's also just the norm where we see royalties getting set around like 10% just feels super high. And that's why you see these NFT products that have insane treasuries because they're making money on all this volume. Another thing we talked about was like, basically making them opt in, and you can sort of see on chain who's paid, royalties on their asset and who isn't, and like maybe those kinds of assets or those people get something special, get higher quality. Those are the kinds of things that can get sold at Sotheby's. And like the Hypebeast people who are flipping on OpenSea, it's like, oh, you didn't pay your royalty on this CryptoPunk, we can't sell it at Sotheby's anymore.
Oh.
Yeah. I actually I do agree that the moment these things move to royalty
So it's
free,
all gentlemen's agreement. It's gentlemen's agreement. all the way
no.
down.
I think
tainted the CryptoPunk.
I think the upshot is these newcomer exchanges have a really good shot of like actually cannibalizing OpenSea. Probably not Magic Eden. Magic Eden seems like ruthlessly fine about cutting fees. Like I don't think they give a shit about creators at all, based on like the fact that they went to the ape coin community and were like, hey, we'll let you pay an ape to subsidize any user, and like they don't have to pay a royalty just to get the ape usage up.
Yeah.
So like they're willing to do anything, versus like OpenSea is like much more like trying to go highbrow. Like, and
OpenSea is definitely, I agree with that. OpenSea is trying to hold on to their highbrow status, but I think they're benefiting a lot from the fact that yes, all the not CryptoPunks, the Bored Apes are traded on OpenSea, and I personally believe that if that changes, and they need to get aggressive on cutting,
they will.
I think they will.
You bring up a good point though about this idea that these collections actually are weirdly decentralized in some sense, and that they don't control their revenue stream. Because yes, during like the speculative bubble, they can like put up this like X% royalty. But when like the market crashes and people are just like, I'm not going to pay it, then the treasury of this thing, like suppose all the nouns were traded like on SudoSwap with no fee, like the nouns treasury has just hit its peak. Then it's never earning any more money.
I mean, they're still selling nouns.
Yeah. Nouns is weird. Nouns is bad example. I meant not someone who has like a fixed size.
Yeah.
There's kind of this interesting thing of like what happens to these projects if like they become abandoned after the royalty goes away, and
Well, I think Bored Ape like shows you the model, which is that like it's
well,
like,
you got to keep launching new shit and airdropping it to all
I
users.
think that's exactly right. I mean, if you consider these things to basically be like luxury goods companies, right? It's like, okay, you created one line of watches. Okay, it's important that those watches trade for a high value, but you got to keep launching more watches. There's more people in the world.
Also, there's this weird thing of like, if you make it to a certain point, you just get other brands basically using your address list as a customer list,
true.
like
That's true.
Tiffany's. Like the Tiffany airdrop to CryptoPunk people is crazy.
Yeah, which is
I mean, look, both people are equally tacky, so I get why that's like the good customer list. But
yikes.
I have to admit, I thought that they were cool. I was like, I'm not even one of these PF. Well, no.
I think Laura's trying to get Tiffany's as a sponsor for the show.
It's so funny. I was about to say I'm not even one of those PFP people, but I have a PFP, which I totally forgot. It's Crypto Coven, of course.
I remember.
My favorite. But yeah, that was actually something that I thought was kind of interesting and cool. But I don't know. Do you feel like real world, assets or whatever you want to call them, based off of these digital things, these digital NFTs, do you think they're going to become a thing? Or is that just like, because it just feels like it creates a whole host of.
I find it kind of tacky.
Yeah, it's just real cringe. But it maps to Miami. So it's like, okay, great. Like,
there's a core to
you
people
literally
who
figured out.
Yeah,
you literally figured out the sales tactic in Miami, which is like, oh, you just go to the like some hotel and you're like, hey, put my product in your hotel, and like that's how you do all your marketing, because like it's like the people who care about that aesthetic will buy your product because they see it at XYZ place. This is the same thing. It's like, oh, now as a CryptoPunk owner, you get to like get free stays at some city. I don't know. It's just like you have to have like taste that's only dictated strictly by dollar values of things for you to like care about this.
Yeah, it's a very like TikTok house approach to like thinking about what NFT status is. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I get it. But I do think that there are some brands that, they're like, definitely, I think the benefit is more for the traditional brand. Like there were a few that did Super Bowl ads where they had like NFT stuff in their ads. And, I feel like that was for the traditional brand to get more cred.
I mean, it's crazy that Tiffany's got $12 million of revenue for like ostensibly what cost them a little bit of PR and like free customer list of like people who are guaranteed to buy it. Sure. That's like insane.
It's a great move by them. Great move.
Yeah, kind of genius. And I bet you we're going to see a lot of other luxury brands.
Have you seen the Tag Heuer NFT watch? They had this watch with a screen on it that I'm impressed by the tech that they were able to get this out so quickly. But basically, it will like sync with your Ethereum wallet and verify that you own an NFT and put your NFT on your watch face.
Oh my God.
Oh
Wow.
boy.
I love people wearing
Innovation.
signs that
Yeah,
say
yeah.
"Mug me right now."
Yeah.
You know, it's like that's
Exactly.
literally what.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's what wearing a Rolex is too, right?
Mhm.
Like, I mean, it's not in
Yeah.
principle different, but it does feel like you're going on the wrong side of the aesthetic. You know, it's like,
Yeah,
It's a-
how did we go from cypherpunks to shitbags? Like, you know, somehow that's like,
Yeah, it
if I ever
happened,
write
it
a
happened.
book about this industry, that's the title
Yeah.
of it.
it is a bit douchey. Like, you know, anyway, whatever. Now, all this stuff is arbitrary. Who the hell knows? Maybe 5 years from now, we're
This
seeing
is
it
why
totally
I'm
out of
pulling
touch.
for the fine art stuff, because at least there it's like, you know, people put thought and, you know, you really, really like had to like make some social commentary about the world when they
You didn't have to
created
make social
something
commentary,
versus some
right?
social commentary about like,
People
hey,
as
there's a
social
lot of
commentary.
people. A better social commentary than apes. Apes are literally
I don't
like
know. We've been talking about apes a lot, you know?
That's
just
true.
because the
This
marketing
social
is good
commentary
doesn't
right now,
doesn't mean it's a
actually.
good social commentary.
Look, I mean, a lot of NFT art is cool. Most of it is not social commentary.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, look at like Fuck Render or something like that. It's really cool. It's not really social commentary.
I guess
The-
I'm just not like
the-
personally that into that.
I
I mean,
did-
that's where we get.
All right.
I did
Tarun
have
doesn't like
two
NFTs.
like real artists on my show that made NFT collections, and their art was so interesting because it really engaged with blockchain technology in fascinating ways. Like one of them took her 23andMe genetic or DNA, whatever, and turned it into a hash or something, and then put it. I think it was like this was so early. It was like back in 2013 or 2014. She put it on a fork of it's like Doge Party or something. Or it's like some counterparty Doge mix up. I don't even know, mashup. It like doesn't exist anymore. And the title was My Soul.
Ooh,
Which I thought was
Yeah.
funny.
Ooh.
Or like, the Mitchell Chan, who is an NFT artist, he did some of the first NFTs before the ERC's 721 standard. His was he found an artist, like a traditional artist, Eve Klein, who he believes actually made the first NFTs, but they were with paper. And what it was he had this like big exhibit, and there were like lines around the block in Paris, and people walked into the gallery, and it was just like empty, but there would be like numbers like number 1, number 2, and like you could buy one of it was called like immaterial zones of pictorial sensibility or something like that. And you could buy one of these, and what you would get is a certificate of your authentic ownership of this. So when Mitchell found this, it's like from the 1950s or whatever, he was like, oh my God, this is the first art NFT. So he made the actual digital NFT version of this in like August 2017. And this was like, before CryptoKitties, whatever. And the funny thing is, so Eve Klein said that you could just buy the certificate, but if you wanted to experience the true apotheosis of the artistic experience, then he would take you to the River Seine, and you had to pay for your digital zone of whatever it was called, immaterial zone. Anyway, you had to pay for it in gold. And so if you wanted the true apotheosis of the artistic experience, then Eve Klein would go with you to the River Seine, and you would have to throw your certificate into the river, and he would throw half of the gold you gave him into the river, and then that would be like the true artistic experience. So when Mitchell
Nice. This is
created,
like Marina Abramovich, but like,
yeah,
50 years ago.
So when Mitchell created his NFT version of it in the smart contract, you had to pay him ETH or whatever, right? But if you ever burned your NFT, which he like somehow the contract would see that or whatever, and it would trigger the burning of half of the ETH that you gave him. So he like created that aspect of it into his anyway. And the point is, all I'm saying is like these kinds of art entities interest me so much, and they're like so different from the PFPs or whatever. Which again, I have a crypto coven, so I'm sort of a fan of those as well. But like that kind of true NFT art where it's like in conversation with art history, and there is like it doesn't have to be social commentary, but it's like engaging with the technology in a way that's like super creative and like makes you think. Like I really like those.
Very cool.
Well, so speaking of true art, we got a last piece of news for the week, which is that biggest news of the week,
Oh gosh.
which is that Dragonfly, just rebranded. So we're now we used to be called Dragonfly Capital. We're now just
That was the
Dragonfly.
biggest news of the-
That's the biggest news of the week. Obviously,
I mean,
and we
I think you
do
guys just
totally
reduced
do our
yourself to 3
website.
ASCII symbols, right? Now you have a logo that's
That
an
is true.
ASCII
That is
emoji.
True. That is true. It's which is that was pretty
It
cool.
looks
good.
We
It's
got
good.
a lot of it. We got a lot of it because it looks very similar to TracerDAO, which recently got
TracerDAO?
acquired by Mycelium. Exactly. No, TracerDAO is great. TracerDAO is great.
I don't even
But
know
they used to have a logo that looked a lot like ours, but it's one weird Greek symbol, whereas ours is like, carrot and then thing and carrot. Anyway, we also announced that we acquired a fund called Metastable Capital, which is the fund I used to be at when I started investing. And so I just wanted to say that to everybody on the show.
Yeah, I have to say,
Do
like,
you guys have like a gang symbol?
Not yet. we may have to invest in something along
I was
those
trying to
lines.
like
That's pretty
get it.
Pretty good. Pretty good.
We have to do that in our future.
It's because it's
team
almost
shots.
hand representable. That's what
It is. I
It
know.
is.
That's the idea. It's very versatile.
you would
It's
be a
versatile.
good shadow puppeteer. Yeah, no, this brought up for me like so many memories of kind of when I, was covering this like earlier on, because, there was a time when it was like Metastable was this sort of secretive thing. And
Yes.
yeah, and I don't think I even knew you at that time. And like later on, I found out that you used to work there. But yeah, is this? I'm trying to think. Yeah, this is what eventually became my first Forbes cover story, where
Oh, really?
it was the one. I don't know if you guys remember the one where I put Olaf on the cover, Olaf Carlson
Oh,
via
yes,
Polychain.
yes, I remember.
Yeah, because you could see the ICO thing happening, and like all these crypto hedge funds were popping up and whatever. And Metastable was like the oldest, crypto hedge fund. But then, for various reasons, I went with Polychain as like the
Well,
the
Olaf was always a lot
story.
more public, right?
Yeah,
Whereas
He
Metastable-
has better hair than all of you.
Well, Naval has pretty good hair.
Olaf still has better.
Oh, yeah. Olaf, that's
Sorry,
true.
Naval.
That's true. He does play better on a cover. I think Naval plays better on Twitter. But
Yes,
Naval was one of the
clearly.
co-founders of Metastable, and so when we acquired Metastable, it's a super OG fund. So it was founded in 2014.
Yes,
They were like in the Ethereum pre-sale. They did Zcash and Tezos and Algorand and Cosmos, Definity, like a huge number of the layer ones that have been very, very successful. And then when I was there, I did Avalanche, did Near, Filecoin, Starkware, a bunch of stuff. So it's a very storied fund, and so it's at least for us, it's been pretty special to take it over. But yeah, it used to be a very shadowy fund back in the very early days of crypto, and so we're now taking it into the Dragonfly family. Anyway, we're super over time, so we need to wrap up. But once again, thank you everybody for listening, and Tarun, you are in very big trouble, and I hope the audience finds it in
Yeah,
Look,
Tarun.
I like to think of it as everyone got a blessing. They got extra time to like talk shit about me.
Exactly.
well, we did, but the audience was just stuck with
the
the
audience was stuck. Well,
static link.
thank you everybody for listening to us in another episode of Chopping Block. We'll be back at you in a couple weeks. Thanks everybody.